Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Neural, the podcast exploring what makes great boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Neural, the board search specialist and market leader bringing science to the art of board hiring. Today's guest, Neil Johnson OBE, has one of the more unusual CVs in British boardrooms. Beginning in the army before transitioning into the automotive industry, he rose to become worldwide sales and marketing director at Jaguar during its privatisation, a lesson in governance, political complexity and organisational identity. Then came an extraordinary pivot. Neil was seconded back into the army to command 4th Battalion, the Royal Green Jackets, an experience that immersed him in high-pressure decision-making where consequences were immediate and personal. Returning to business, he ran Land Rover and Rover Group's European operations for British Aerospace. He later became Director General of the Engineering Employers Federation and CEO of the RAC, where he led the high-profile demutualisation and sale of RAC motoring services. Since then, Neil has built a portfolio career as Group Chair of QinetiQ and former Chair of Motability Operations, Synthoma, Centaur Media, E2V, Cybit and Electra Private Equity, as well as serving for 7 years as Senior Independent Director and Deputy Chair of the Business Growth Fund. Alongside his commercial roles, he was also a Home Office-appointed independent member of the Metropolitan Police Authority in the run-up to the London 2012 Olympics. Neil, a huge welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Ollie, for inviting me.
Now, you have had a fascinating executive experience. Can we start by talking about the 3 most formative executive experiences in the boardroom that have most shaped how you operate today as a board member?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect anyone in my position would say this, but you sort of learn from the good and the bad as you gain experience around the boardroom table or as a senior executive. And for example, I always say this when anybody asks me about, where did you learn or hone your chairmanship skills, if indeed there are any skills. And I think it's from learning from others, but learning from others, both the good and the bad. And when I say bad, what I really mean is, chairmen who are not as engaged as maybe they should be with the business, and therefore, you really have to explain things to them 3 or 4 times, which is a bit boring if you're chief executive. But on the other hand, then there are chairs from whom I've certainly learned, and I think of with real great affection. And I guess my first of those was Michael Edwards in the automotive industry, who was an extraordinary leader with a very clear vision of what needed to be done. And then much later in life, and we might come back to this one in RAC days, which was a bit of a battle in a non-military sense. I had the joy of working with the former chief exec and chair of British Airways, Colin Marshall. And he was just the supreme chair, involved to exactly the right degree, always approachable, always available, wherever he was in the world. If I needed to speak to him, the deal we had was if I needed to, he knew I needed to, and he was available. And I learned a lot from Sir Colin now, but before he died, of course, Lord Marshall. But a great chair and one with lots of experience that was really helpful to me as I was growing into the role.
So tell me, what was it exactly with Michael Edwards that stood out for you about the vision that he brought as a chair?
Well, I think he was very clear about what was needed. The concerns and issues were on a number of fronts. Easy to forget now, nearly 40 years on, but the battles with the trade unions and with militant trade unions in most of UK motor manufacturing plants were at their height. We had Margaret Thatcher in 10 Downing Street for most of it. So we had her agenda of trade union reform, overlaying what we were trying to do to run the business. And the challenge really was, are we going to keep this company going, or are we going to be part of a sort of spearhead of saying to the trade union movement, well, if you want to behave so badly, guess what? There aren't going to be any jobs because we're going to close the business. And that's sort of where Michael came from. He was quite clear that the alternative to success was closure. His first act, which, as it turned out, benefited me, obviously it was a huge workforce and a very large management cohort in the business. Because he didn't know anyone, he came in and sent the top 500 executives, and I do mean 500, not 50, to be psycho shrunk in Harley Street. And I must have been 499 on that list at the time, and eventually got sent off to be shrunk, as we all called it. I'm sure there was a much more technical medical term for it. But at the end of that process, quite a lot of individuals left the business, having been told that they weren't fitting the new regime. And I got the call to go and see him on a Monday morning, and I'd seen him but never met him. And so I thought this could be the bag of balloons and sweeties time. That's fine. In fact, what he said to me was, and at the time I was running a rather large part of the service operation of Austin Rover. And he said, what do you know about strategic marketing? And I said, well, Chairman, you could write on the back of a very small postage stamp what I know about strategic marketing. I'm more on the engineering side. And he said, okay, fine. Well, I've got your profile. And from next Monday morning, you are my staff director of marketing strategy and planning. So clear your desk in Oxford and be in the headquarters on Monday morning. And that was the start of an extraordinary relationship and a very interesting time. And I guess that sort of that ruthless clarity. And by the way, I don't think ruthless is a bad word. I think it just means you're focused and you know what you want. And he had that ruthless clarity that he wanted round pegs in round holes. He wanted people who could really perform and get the job done. And it was a fascinating ride.
When you talk about that clarity, it sounds like he was motivated by avoiding the sort of the cliff edge of the business closing. Did he also have a clarity of where it wanted to go, or to what extent did he leave that to the executive?
Well, he was executive chair, so he had his feet in both camps. It was the proper corporate governance and strategic direction, but it was also delivery. And in a sense, and I think I remember him once saying this, he saw his boss as the Prime Minister. We're doing this for the country. We are trying to get this done for the country. And the longer history is that, to a certain extent, that succeeded, but to a large extent, we lost the volume of the British motor industry over the ensuing 20 years or so. We couldn't have known that at the time, and for a whole host of different reasons. But he was absolutely clear that we couldn't stumble on as the business had been, and that there had to be fundamental change. And it was actually as a result of that and what we'd done over the years that I got fired off to Jaguar, because that again was a fix it or shut it situation. That was a happier story because we did fix it.
You've touched on there your experience in the automotive industry. Tell me more about your time in the 4th Battalion, because what fascinates me is that in the US, you have many more board members with military experience than we have in the UK. So curious to hear the story of that and how it feeds into how you operate today as a board member.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it came as a bit. I was a Jaguar, and I had been a regular Solier earlier in my life, and went out into the engineering and automotive industry. And we're talking about the last, as it turned out, about the last 5 or 6 years of the Cold War. And there was a bit of a debate going on in the Ministry of Defense, I think, about, wait for it, battle casualty replacements. Because at the end of the Cold War, it was getting quite warm. And there was a worry that if push came to shove and we actually did have a NATO-Warsaw Pact conflict of whatever duration, and you can compare and contrast this with what's going on in Ukraine right now, there were going to be very significant casualties right the way across the spectrum, and commanding officers wouldn't be exempt from that risk. And so we needed, one school of thought in MOD went, we needed to have a pool of capable amateurs, shall I put it that way, who could be metaphorically parachuted in and carry on the battle. And I received a call from a very senior officer who happened to be of my regiment, who said, we fantastic career. What wonderful stuff you're doing. Absolutely great that you're doing all that. What do you think about coming back into the army for 2 or 3 years? And I thought, you're absolutely bonkers. No. But that from that seed, which then got watered, grew the concept of me being what was effectively a guinea pig, going back into my regiment, commanding a battle group in 12th Armoured Brigade in Germany, but based in the UK with the battalion. And I guess it was a test. And I think it probably worked. I probably came to military conclusions via a rather different tree from my military contemporaries. But that was probably just, the formation of what I've been doing in business. So getting there perhaps a little bit more quickly or via a different route. And I found it absolutely fascinating, and I loved it, and it was financially illiterate, but there you go. And it was a huge privilege to be able to work with and command a Green Jacket battle group. Friends I made in that time are still friends. Even my driver, we still, chat to one another. It's a very special thing, and anybody who's been through that will know that. And it's a huge honor and privilege to be given that command of such fine individuals.
Is there anything you've taken from that experience that you use on your boards today that a board member listening who hasn't had that experience might be able to learn from? Yeah,
I mean, I think for me, and this is really a hugely important part of what I do, and I'm going to repeat in a sense what I said a few moments ago. I mean, it's all about people and getting out on the ground with teams at all levels, not just senior managers or middle managers, but the sessions that I enjoy most actually when I visit our sites are sessions with the early careers, boys and girls, apprentices, recently joined graduates, getting their sense of the business and what their ambitions are and what they see the opportunities as being. Because you sort of learn more in those conversations than you do from reading 10 board papers.
Can you give me an example of something you've learned recently from one of those sessions?
Yes, I can actually. I mean, it was, this is very recent. I was at one of our sites and had a a sandwich lunch with graduates and apprentices. And I'm genuinely interested. I mean, in a way, this almost goes back to what you were talking about when we were talking about job opportunities and legislation and all the rest of it. And because of the stuff we do, we're quite a technology-driven business. So historically, we've probably been fishing more in the university pools than the apprenticeship pools. What I sense from what I have discussed with both graduates and apprentices is that choice of education is becoming far more nuanced in terms of what the younger generation want to do, and the fact that they don't want to end up with 40 or 50,000 pounds worth of university loan debt, and would rather be learning on the job and actually maybe later on doing a degree, as part of a development process. And I found that really interesting. And then talking to one of the graduates, and she's a scientist, and she said to me that she felt very grateful to have the role that she's got within the company. Early days, but she's loving it. And I think she said only 2 of her university cohort, and these are all scientists, have got a job. So, okay, that's not directly related to the business, but it's very much related to the environment within which we work. And it's that sort of learning that I really find fascinating.
Can we talk about one of the other big executive experiences you had, which was the RAC demutualization and sale? When you look back at that process, what was the hardest boardroom conversation you had?
Actually, that's quite an easy one. Firing the chairman.
Tell me more.
Well, the whole thing kicked off because I actually, give a bit of context. I had been attracted, perhaps I should say, into the RAC as chairman-elect, with the agreement that I was going to spend a couple of years, learning the ropes, and then it didn't quite pan out that way because whilst learning the ropes, about 3 or 4 months into learning the ropes, which meant going around everywhere and, making my own mind up about how things were, I'm afraid I had to tell the then board that they were accelerating towards a concrete block and the business was going bust, which was not welcome news. So what was agreed was that we put the chairman bit on hold, and would I run the business for a period of time? To which I said, yeah, of course, that's not a problem. And then there was a lot of work, and I had to bring in a lot of talent to really turn the business around, focus on what we needed to focus on, get the culture right, get people moving in the right direction. I mean, essentially, we had an organization that was created in 1897 as a club, the Royal Automobile Club, which was extremely elitist because there weren't all that many automobiles or owners at that time. And then it grew and grew and grew over the next nearly 100 years. And motoring services became a huge business in its own right. And it was a sort of tail wagging the dog rather than the dog wagging the tail, because all of this was run from Pall Mall, the club. And it wasn't very efficient. No decisions or meetings took place without food and wine. And that was just how it was. And it needed to be shunted very fast into the modern day, with a proper management structure and a different reporting structure, and just professionalize the whole thing. So all of that was going on in the background. And at around that time, there was a demutualization of the Cooperative Wholesale Society, which was quite controversial. It triggered in me a bit of a worry that we were a mutual, and could this happen to us? So we started the process of really trying to untangle who actually owned the RAC, who were the shareholders, who would have the vote. And obviously we were working with some really high-powered city advisors to try and nail that down. And the outcome of that was that we had a sort of plan, a framework that we knew we were working towards, and all would be well. Except that in the execution of that process, one or two of the brethren at the centre had thought, this sounds like a good idea. Maybe we can make a few bob out of this. And so what actually happened was an ambush from a very limited number of the board, which was huge at the RAC, including the then chair, who decided they'd have a go themselves at buying and selling the business. It's a rather sordid story, but I was on a skiing holiday. It had been particularly timed to hit the street on a day that I was in Austria on holiday with my family, and our entire office was in the back of furniture vans being moved from the palatial headquarters in Pall Mall to a commercial headquarters in Reading. So all very carefully timed, full marks for that. And I had to fly back that day, still in ski kit, not the boots or with the skis, but I was in fact wearing an anorak. Having called a board meeting for 5 o'clock, I think I got there at about 5:30. The plotters were all there, and they were extremely surprised to see me walk in. And that was really the start of, I'm afraid I really get that this is totally unacceptable. The conflicts of interest here are mammoth. We need to have a board subcommittee to decide how we handle the fact that this has driven a coach and horses through good corporate governance, not to mention good behavior. And by the end of that meeting, I was looking for a new chairman.
If you're listening to these conversations and thinking, I'd love some support as I build my own board journey, that's exactly what the Enter the Boardroom community is for. It's the destination for current and aspiring board members, offering practical guidance, trusted insight, and a high-caliber peer community to help you build a credible board portfolio and succeed in today's boardrooms. Listeners can get 10% off. Head to etb.newroll.com and use the code ENTER at checkout. That's etb.newroll.com. So much to dissect there. Can we go back to why were you able to see that this organisation was heading into a cliff and the board hadn't seen it? What lesson is there for those?
They weren't engaged. I mean, I said earlier, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but also accurately, that no board meeting or decision got taken without food and wine. I mean, it was a club trying to masquerade as a commercial organization. And I don't know how long it had taken for it to get to the point where it was beginning to fall apart, but it was indeed beginning to fall apart. I mean, it was a fascinating role, because not only was I running the motoring services division with thousands of staff and, big infrastructure. And obviously all the patrols on the road and all of it. And they felt completely detached. There was it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You need to engage with people and understand where they're coming from. I actually spent time as a patrol. I would go out every few months as a patrol, and I would get more information on what was going on in Ferrari's cafe in Smithfield at 2:00 in the morning, which is where the London patrols would congregate for a bacon sandwich or something, than you could get anywhere else, and learn what the reality was.
So it has echoes of the Secret Millionaire format of going undercover as a chair right into the heart of the business.
No, they knew who I was.
They didn't know who. Okay.
Yeah.
And they were happy to share their true feelings at that moment.
Yeah, look, you have to gain people's trust. And first meeting, of course not. Very reserved. What the hell are you doing here? Playing around as a patrol, wearing our uniform and all that stuff. But actually, when they realized I could do it, and enjoyed it, and, I had other responsibilities too, but I really wanted to get feedback on what they thought was wrong with the business, that you can then start moving forward. And we were doing things that we were just doing from habit. So we had a hangar full of people, hundreds of people, answering technical queries, which we'd been doing since, before the First World War. So if you have any make of car and you don't know what the plug gap should be, you phone the RAC and they'll tell you. And I mean, I can remember saying to somebody, why did we do that? Are we getting paid for it? And the answer, well, no, we've always done it. Of course we do. That's what we do. We were still doing paper maps and routes for people, because that's what we do. And so actually, once you'd got to grips with the fact that there was a problem, solving it was much easier because, it had been allowed to get to such a bad state that there were so many obvious pointers what needed to be done to rescue the business. Forgive the pun, sorry, but it happened quite quickly, actually. And that was when people started seeing value in it, which perhaps previously hadn't been there.
Now, you faced a situation there and having to get rid of the chair, which comes up quite regularly in the masterminds we host in our established board member community. And people find that situation really difficult where they've got a chair who's not right, and how do they get rid of them? What was your approach that you can sort of share with those listening that they might be able to take something from?
Well, it was a bit of a before en feu speech, I'm afraid, to the assembled board. We have got to do this and we've got to do it now. This isn't a nice, tidy, planned process. Somebody has rolled a hand grenade down the table with the pin out of it, and we need to deal with it. And happily, enough of the band of brothers said, yes, we agree to get it done.
So you confronted them literally en masse as one. You hadn't sort of been able to pick them off before the meeting.
I mean, I literally just walked in.
Wow.
In an anorak.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I guess, that could have gone badly wrong.
Well, it could have gone badly wrong, but it could only have gone badly wrong for a period of time, because what was happening was so appalling that if I had to spend more time on it, I think we'd have got the same answer. But fortunately, that isn't where we ended up.
Has there ever been a moment in your board career where you thought, I might not be up to this?
Always. My advice to my kids is when they start a new job, if you haven't got imposter syndrome when you start, there's something wrong with you. I've never started a job I thought I could do.
Is that really true? Because you come across as so confident, and I could imagine you would deal with anything thrown at you, especially having had that sort of army experience.
Yeah, well, Ollie, it's kind of you to say so, but I still think, and I promise you, I'm not sort of blowing smoke or anything. I still think if you start a job and you think, I can walk this, there's something quite wrong, because you don't know anything about it. You don't know when you start. You don't know anything. You might have all the experience, but you don't know about this business. And getting under the skin of this business is what it's all about, and making your own judgments and getting stuff done. So I genuinely would answer all the time, because I think that's how it is.
One of the things I love to do with Enter the Boardroom guests is do a deep dive case study. So I'd love to do that with you on QinetiQ if you're happy with that.
Yeah.
You became chair in 2019, just before COVID, and at a time of rising geopolitical tension.
Yep.
What was the first thing you set out to change or reinforce in the way the board operated?
I attended 3 board meetings before I took over as chair. And let me be clear, I'm not in any sense criticizing either my predecessor, who I've had a huge regard for, or the way the board had evolved. But I did find it a bit formulaic. And I wouldn't go as far as to say that you were using the minutes of the last meeting to run this meeting, but it was moving it in that a bit in that direction. So what I really wanted to do was make the board participation much more hands-on. And obviously, you then inherit people who are used to a certain way of doing things, and find change a bit threatening. But that's fine. You have to talk your way through it. But for me, what do you want to do when you land is learn, not assume that you've come across this before. Find out what the key challenges and opportunities are in the business. Get out in the business as much as you can, meeting people. I try to make people laugh by saying, if I'm visiting, this is not a royal visit, okay? I'm coming to work. I work here as well. So just let's, work at it from that point of view. So no red carpet, let's just get down to work. And I think by doing that, and by visiting and meeting as many people as you can, you quite quickly get a feel for the culture and how it can best be molded and directed to improve the business. And I equally add getting out and meeting shareholders, because these are the people who've written the checks and put their pound notes on the table to buy the stock, and they wouldn't do that if they didn't have a view. So you might as well listen to it, even if you don't agree with it. You need to know what they're thinking. And I genuinely find that. Some people find shareholders, particularly the sort of corporate governance wonks, they find them quite threatening. I just think you've got to deal with it. And just stick to the knitting and get stuff done, and be open and honest.
The way you talked about that board evolution there dropped a thought in my mind that I hadn't thought of it in this way before, which is, I guess in some ways you're a little bit like a manager of a football team coming in, and you've got your style of playing, whether it's direct or possession-based or counter-attacking, and the players that you have inherited might not be right for your style of play. Is that how you would think about it? Do you think sort of chairs have different styles, and someone might be a great board member but just not fit that particular chair's style of play?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation. I'd never really quite sort of thought of it in those direct terms, but I think you're probably right. I try to be, if there's such a thing as style, very light touch, very encouraging, not trying to dominate conversation, but listening, trying to draw out from individuals what they want to say and what their thoughts are, and then just sort of bringing it together at the end as I think what I've heard is, we're doing this or this or this, and moving on, and saying, is everybody happy with that? Yeah, if they are, that's great. And then it's sort of job done. And quite light touch. Some find that probably quite, I don't know quite what the word is. It's not cavalier, because I do take it very seriously, but I think you should have fun as well. And one of the things I try to do with all boards, and always have, is to have a social side to it as well. So whether it's a board dinner where you don't just talk business, or one-to-ones, tend to do over breakfast because it fits most people's diaries. I think that's quite important too, to maintain the human relationship at a non-work level, which then gets translated into a team spirit. To come back to your analogy.
So if you characterize your style of chairing as, I don't know whether light touch is the right way to frame it, can you identify other archetypes that you've experienced of chair styles that are different from that?
Yeah, I mean, some give you the solution before they've asked the question, which I don't think is a very good way of doing stuff. And I've also seen I was going to say very ponderous, but I think I mean uncertain, actually, style. Probably slightly scared of letting the conversation go too far left or right, and wanting to keep it on the rails. And I think you get much more color and value from going around the edges as well and seeing what the options are, and then coming back to what you actually want to do. So I would never try and stop somebody straying a bit in terms of, are we sure we want to do this, or why are we doing it? So I think that's, good, valuable stuff. And and again, I mean, there are different cultures, and having that mix of cultural experience on the board, I find hugely helpful. So if we're talking about QinetiQ, I've managed to persuade Roger Crone to come on the board, who was the chief executive of Leidos. I mean, Roger has been there, seen it, got the T-shirt, done it all several times. Having that experience around, I can put his hand up and say, do you know what? I did something like this a while back, and absolutely valuable. And so it is actually back to what you said, of building a team that are all playing the same rules.
Neil, time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a short question and ask you for a brief response if you're ready.
Okay.
Best book every board member should read, and why?
Freedom's Forge, which I've only come across fairly recently. It's a story. Well, it's a story. It's an account of how the United States automotive and other industries stepped up to the challenge of the Second World War by completely transforming themselves in a matter of months. Just quite extraordinary. Raw materials, steel, everything just being totally refocused away from a consumer society to a country at war.
Amazing what countries can do under pressure,
yep.
As COVID showed. Most impactful question you've heard in the boardroom?
Why do we do this?
What's a boardroom myth you think needs busting?
It's a sinecure.
Boardroom behavior that irritates you most?
It's what I call the when I comment. When I was doing something else, or when I was at, and repetitively, that's quite challenging.
Most valuable board ritual.
Social interaction. Very important.
Favourite quote.
One of mine, I'm afraid. If you can't take a joke, you shouldn't have joined.
Most significant professional insight.
Integrity tops being too clever by half.
Worst professional advice you've ever received.
Let's sue them.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time?
I think spending too much time on corporate governance and not spending enough time on the business.
So historically, you thought you should spend more time on corporate governance.
I think
now.
historically boards thought they should spend more time. I've always been a cynic in that, or skeptical around that. But I'm absolutely sure now that you shouldn't spend too much time on corporate governance.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom, and what did you learn?
It's back to litigation, I'm afraid. When a lawyer says, let's sue them.
So the lesson was...
Don't.
Don't believe the lawyer.
Don't. No.
Finally, 3 things our listeners should take away from this episode if they take nothing else.
Okay, well, very, very important for me. Never stop learning. Every day there's something new to learn. Don't think you've got there on your journey. Listen more than you talk. And spend quality time at all levels with individuals.
Neil, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience.
Ollie, it's been great. I've enjoyed it. Thanks very much indeed.
If today's guest has got you reflecting on your own board journey, Enter the Boardroom community is there to support you. Designed for emerging, developing, and established board members, the community brings together expert guidance, structured programs, peer connection, and access to real board opportunities, all without noisy networking or false promises. It's informed by New Roll's Board Insight, but focused on helping you become a stronger, more credible board member. Listeners can get 10% off. Head to etb.newroll.com and use the code ENTER at checkout. That's etb.newroll.com.